My name is Dr. Cynthia Elise Smith, and I am an anti racism, anti white supremacism educator and essayist specializing in essays, lectures, discussions, and presentations with alternative views on race, racist color, racist character, racism, white supremacy, whiteness, blackness, and value. I offer deeper, more critical perspectives on these subjects, including the potential implications of wording in the U.S. language lexicon that are not ordinarily considered racialized because they may be euphemized, dog whistled, or couched within usually benign contexts. Now, I am not here to change your mind. I say this all the time. This is part of the spiel, part of the introduction. But I'm here to make you think critically about the subject matter I'm about to present. As you think critically, you may begin to change your own mind. Understand that this presentation, lecture, essay, and or discussion is designed to make you think, but it may not be comfortable. Before I begin, you will need 3 critical thinking tools. And I always talk about this is a little bit of housekeeping. These critical thinking tools you will use throughout this presentation. I call them the 3 C's of navigating through the language system of racism and white supremacy. They are very important, and you'll find out why. Comprehension. This is the most important because it is the essence of understanding what you are saying, being told, writing, or reading, or the ability of your mind to form and craft imagery from concepts and words. Next is context. Context, second only to comprehension, is the ability to understand the circumstances. Now, this part is very important for what we're going to be talking about today. The circumstances that form the setting for an event, statement, idea, effect, consequence, or solution, and in terms through which they can be fully identified, comprehended, and assessed, such as the value. Next is connotation. Connotation is the ability of the words to summon the emotion or an idea or feeling that a word invokes in addition to its literary or primary meaning. Connotation is particularly important because it is the feeling of the words, the reaction associated with a word. It's the expressive part. It's the part of the words, sentences, and paragraphs from your thoughts that create the drama and cause you to react happily, sadly, kindly, violently, or otherwise. Now, for purposes of this and all of my essays, lectures, and discussions, these are the definitions of race, racist color, racist character, racism, white supremacy, whiteness, and value that I'll be using. First up is race. Race is any one of the groups that humans are often divided into based on physical traits regarded as common among people of shared ancestry. Race as color is color used to distinguish a race of people. Race as character is character used to distinguish a race of people. What do I mean by character? We all know what color being used to distinguish a race of people means, but character, uh, when your character is described as criminal or uh, high IQ, low IQ, uh, different things like that. These are these are character traits that people determine should be distinguishing factors of race of people. With Black people, it's lazy, uh, criminal, and all those other kinds of things, oversexed and things like that. Next up is racism. Now, racism is so important. This is so important because so many people have misconceptions of racism and what it really is in America. In the United States, racism is a systematic subjugation within established institutions in the U.S. through structurally designed discrimination and denial of opportunity, equity, equality, and justice built into every institution in the country to control the formerly enslaved and their descendants in perpetuity, which is why you and I, the Black people, still suffer under racism. After the enslavement ended and the enslaved were emancipated, it is not simply prejudice or bias and the associated behaviors. And I give this example. Can Black people despise white people? Absolutely. Can Black people hate white people because they are white? Yes. But can Black people as a collective suppress the vote, ban books by white authors simply on the basis of race, change history to sanitize it for the comfort of Black people, deny the very system that was created in the first place in the face of overwhelming generational evidence that exists to this day? No, a resounding no. That is exclusively whiteness at work using the mechanism of racism as that unbleached definition describes. And that's going to be particularly important with what I'm going to be reading to you today, in terms of universal health care. Next up is white supremacism. White supremacism is the ideology that uses the color white and whiteness as a value and merit measurement, where superiority and goodness align with the color white and the color black and blackness aligned as bad or inferior, each having been assigned generations ago to skin pigment. Next is whiteness. Whiteness is the theory that skin pigment or the assignment of the color white to imply skin color. And notice it's the implication of skin color. This is why we all know that white people don't have white skin and Black people don't have black skin, but brown. But there's no brown in the Bible that talks about purity and goodness. There is nothing in the culture where brown is considered bad except for brown nosing. But we know what that means. So it's important to understand the implication of skin color, of the colors black and white, are purposeful. Okay, the indoctrinated perception is of complete sovereignty. And we talked about sovereignty, remember, over and above anything else on the planet Earth. Now, last but not least is value. Value is the desirability of something, often in respect of some property, such as usefulness or exchangeability, worth, merit, or importance. Now, understand that value has an intrinsic association with the terms race, race as color, race as character, racism, and white supremacy, because value is the codifier for those terms, providing both context and connotation and leading to better comprehension for each. Now, today's discussion is on universal health care. Yes, universal health care. Sit back and pay attention. Put on your critical thinking caps because this discussion will need your full attention. We all have probably heard about the terms universal health care and single payer. So, what is universal health care? The World Health Organization describes it as universal health coverage, UHC, which means that all people have access to the full range of quality health services they need when and where they need them without financial hardship. It covers the full continuum of essential health services from health promotion to prevention, treatment, rehabilitation, and palliative care. Hold on one second. Let me make sure this stuff is turned down. Okay. Simply put, everyone in the country has health care access. Oh, everyone in the country has healthcare access, where access means the ability to obtain healthcare services such as prevention, diagnosis, treatment, and okay, said that my mic was unplugged, but it's plugged back in. Sorry for that. In terms of access and coverage, the National Institutes of Health of the Health of the National Library of Medicine states that universal health coverage is attained when people actually obtain the health services they need and benefit from financial risk protection. Access, on the other hand, is the opportunity or ability to do both of these things. Hence, universal health coverage is not possible without universal access, but the two are not the same. Access has three dimensions: physical accessibility. This is understood as the availability of good health services within reasonable reach of those who need them and of and other aspects of service organization and delivery that allow people to obtain the services when they need them. Financial affordability. This is a measure of people's ability to pay for services without financial hardship. It takes into account not only the price of the healthcare services, but also indirect and opportunity costs. For example, the cost of transportation to and from facilities and of taking time away from work. Affordability is influenced by the wider health financing system and by household income. Next is acceptability. This captures people's willingness to seek services. Acceptability is low when patients perceive services to be ineffective or when cultural and social factors such as language or the age, sex, ethnicity, or religion of the health provider discourage them from seeking services. Services must be physically accessible, financially affordable, and acceptable to patients if universal health coverage is to be attained. So, universal health coverage refers to any approach that ensures that all of a country's residents, in most cases, only those who are legally present in the country, have health coverage. The coverage can be provided under a government run program or a system of private health insurance or a combination of the two. With single payer healthcare systems, a single government or government related source pays for all covered healthcare services. Governments use this strategy to achieve several goals, including universal healthcare, decreased economic burden of healthcare, and improved health outcomes for the population. At present, there are 73 countries with universal healthcare. The US is not one of them. It must be pointed out that there is a difference between free and universal health care. Free healthcare means that healthcare is provided to every citizen in a country or for free at a subsidized rate compared to other countries. Universal healthcare, on the other hand, implies that the country has a healthcare system that is accessible by at least 90% of its citizens. Now, the topic of universal health care has been a controversial issue for many years, hot potato, often discussed in terms of private market availability versus government run systems. Some even describe it as a form of socialism. According to an article published in the National Library of Medicine, Countries with highly unequal family incomes and a culture of privilege have little political will to adopt a single payer system. In the United States, it is becoming increasingly acceptable for the wealthy to buy their way to better quality education, healthcare, political influence, even justice. Of course, there's a deeper context, of course, that needs to be explored since many are still not convinced that white supremacism and racism are embedded within each and every aspect of life in this country, not the least of which is healthcare and insurance. Therefore, we must understand this deeper context, examining history to understand why this country really does not participate in the kind of healthcare systems common in other countries. This brings me to an article I found on the Hartman Report, excerpted from his book, The Hidden History of American Healthcare: Why Sickness Bankrupts You and Makes Others Insanely Rich. Shout out to Tom Hartman, whose show airs on Free Speech TV every day and on YouTube, offering an unbleached view of this country and its politics. Hold on one second. Hold on one second. I'm sorry about that interruption. This is going to be a long read. So, those of you who do not want to stay for that, feel free to uh, watch it on the replay. Those of you who are here, welcome. Thank you for coming. I did want to point out that I have now reached a milestone in light bulbs. I think I only need about 7 more to hit the 1,000 mark. But what's more important today is, and I guess every day after this, is watch hours. So do watch the videos and tell your friends and relatives and anybody who are interested in what I provide to you to watch the videos so I can build my watch hours. Of course, like the video, subscribe, and share. Now I'll begin. Former Olympic gold medalist Mary Lou Retton is struggling to pay her medical bills and has opened up a GoFundMe page to collect donations. How can this be happening in the wealthiest nation in the world? America is the only developed country in the world that doesn't recognize healthcare as a human right. The only country with more than 2/3 of its population lacking access to affordable health care. And the only country in the developed world that has, since its founding, continuously enslaved and legally oppressed and disenfranchised a large minority of its population because of their race. And who do you think that is? These things are connected. Roughly 60% of Americans would have had to take out a loan or otherwise borrow or beg for money to deal with a single unexpected $1,000 expense. Yet copays and deductibles when a person gets sick average $1,318 in 2015. When the Kaiser Family Foundation did a comprehensive survey of Americans, up from 548 just 10 years earlier. This strikes minorities particularly hard, which it turns out is not an accident. Now, let me point out, first of all, before as I read through this, Tom Hartman is a white man. He's a liberal. I believe he's a progressive. Tom Hartman is a no nonsense truth teller, uh, the likes of which I wish many more were as well. But he doesn't mind telling the truth. And but I do want to point out that he is still white, and he is going to use terms such as minority. I've discussed what I think of that term, but this is what this culture has brought people to believe, that we are minorities. So it says, he says, the simple fact is that were it not for slavery, white supremacy, and the legacy of scientific racism, America would have had a national single payer healthcare system in 1915, just 31 years after Germany put into place the modern world's first such program. Get ready, because we're talking about the history. At the center of the effort to prevent a national healthcare system or any form of government assistance that may incidentally offer benefits to African Americans. In fact, you know what, light bulbs? I'm just going to go ahead and insert black wherever I see African American or minority, because this is the reality. Make no mistake. So, at the center of the effort to prevent a national healthcare system, or any form of government assistance that may even incidentally offer benefits to Black people, were Frederick Ludwig Hoffman and the Prudential Life Insurance Company. Yes, people, Prudential. The Prudential Life Insurance Company, which promoted his science based racial theories to successfully fight single payer health insurance. He has subtitled here, Frederick Ludwig Hoffman makes a discovery. Racism is the main reason that America doesn't consider healthcare a human right. Did you hear me? What did I say racism was? Huh? What is racism? The systematic subjugation within established institutions in the U.S. through structurally designed discrimination and denial of opportunity, equity, equality, and justice built into every institution in the country to control the formerly enslaved and their descendants in perpetuity after the enslavement ended. Let's not get this thing twisted, because racism is the main reason that America doesn't consider healthcare a human right and provide it to all its citizens, as does every other developed country in the world. Racist whites, particularly in the South, have worked for over a century to make sure that healthcare is hard for Black people and other minorities to get. But trust and believe, trust and believe, racism of Black people is the reason. And their biggest ally. their founding spokesperson in the post Civil War era. Their biggest champion right up to the 1940s was a man that most Americans have never even heard of. In 1844, 19-year-old Frederick Ludwig Hoffman left Germany for America after failing a number of job attempts and being rejected for the German army because he was physically deficient and frail, standing at 5'7" and weighing a mere 110 pounds. He arrived in New York with $4.76 in his pocket, speaking not a word of English, but determined to prove wrong his mother's assessment that he was a good for nothing. From this humble beginning, Hoffman went on to become one of America's most influential statisticians and analysts of public health, making numerous consequential discoveries about how industrialization was killing American workers. He dropped the last N in his name, became so fluent in English that his accent was nearly indistinguishable, and married into an upscale Georgia family. By 1920, he was an American citizen, vice president of America's largest insurance company, and a national authority on the now discredited pseudoscience called scientific racism. Now, many of you know, and I probably will do something on that, on how the insurance companies played such a large role in the enslavement, and most of the money, most of the wealth of these insurance companies came from the enslavement of our families, our ancestors. In 1908, his article, The Mortality from Consumption, Tuberculosis, in the Dusty Trades, published by the U.S. Department of Labor, produced the first national efforts to reduce lung damage in the workplace. He also published the first work in 1915 linking tobacco to lung cancer. So, just as an aside, they knew that lung cancer came from tobacco and smoking tobacco as early as 1915. Hmm. Sidebar. From this, he became vice president of the National Tuberculosis Association, today known as the American Lung Association, and later demonstrated the connection between exposure to asbestos and the disease that killed his father, Tom Hartman's father, mesothelioma. A bit of data that asbestos companies worked to keep hidden for the next 80 years. In 1913, Hoffman wrote a seminal paper on the relationship between workplace pollution and cancer, which led him to confound the American Society for the Control of Cancer, known today as the American Cancer Society. In 1937, he extended his research beyond the workplace and published Cancer and the Diet, with facts and observations on related subjects, a book correctly pointing out the correlation between poor nutrition and cancer that is still in print at a dense 767 pages, mostly of statistical analysis between dietary habits and the rates of disease. His cancer research was so extensive and detailed, he concluded that diets heavy in processed foods and animal products produced higher cancer rates. That Adele Davis, whose books were Mr. Hartman's mother's nutrition guru in the 1950s and 60s, became an early convert and a devotee of Frederick Hoffman. But Hoffman's most controversial lifelong obsession was the relationship between disease, race, and society. Just had to be, with all the important information that he conveyed to the world. His lifelong obsession was the relationship between disease, race, and society. So on one of his first trips to Georgia, he wrote, he came across a book by Dr. Eugene R. Corson, a Georgia obstetrician, titled The Vital Equation of the Colored Race and Its Future in the United States. Now, see, keep in mind, it is habitual for people to include, in turn, I guess, for the sake of inclusivity, other people who are considered protected classes of people when discussing things that are really all about the Black people. Okay, so bear this in mind, because why would this be the vital equation of the colored race and its future in the United States? Okay, so we're not talking about the colored race and other minorities. We're talking about Black people. So let's keep that context in mind. It was apparently an updated and shortened version of Corson's widely read The Future of the Colored Race in the United States from an Ethnic and Medical Standpoint, published in 1887 in the New York Medical Times. This was just after the failure of Reconstruction and a widespread topic of speculation, particularly in the South, was whether Black people would soon outnumber white people in that part of the country. The Ku Klux Klan and others calling for wholesale slaughter and suppression of Black people claimed that they were more likely to have larger families because they were, quote, more prolific, code for overly sexual, a charge that had persisted from the earliest days of the enslavement and led to the murder of Emmett Till, among others. However, the scientific racists of the day, like Corson, thought differently. Corson led a movement suggesting that Black people of African ancestry, now lacking the protective womb of enslavement, would die out for the simple reason that the Black race was inferior to whites. Corson acknowledged the Klan's argument that the simpler the organization, the simpler the genesis, and the greater the prolificness. Now, before I continue, I just want to point out that this is being read to you under the doctrine of fair use. Just as a reminder, the doctrine of fair use. And just keep remembering to like and subscribe. Okay? The doctrine of fair use. Corson acknowledged the Klan's argument that the simpler the organism, the simpler the genesis, and the greater of prolificness. But he said white people would prevail because they were less likely to die of disease, citing Herbert Spencer's theory of population deduced from the general law of animal fertility. While black people might have more children, Corson wrote, white people would still outnumber them because black, and I don't know how to pronounce this word. I'm going to assume it's fecundity. I can't pronounce it. Is more than compensated for by the ability of white people to maintain individual life. It looks like it's spelled Fecundity, fecundity or fecundity. And it's probably not pronounced that way. I'm going to look that up. Enslaved people from Africa had found themselves in a civilization of which they are not a product and thus were less likely to be successful in the struggle for existence. Are you listening to me? Do you hear what is being discussed at that time? Can you imagine what is being discussed at that time? Enslaved people from Africa had found themselves in a civilization of which they are not a product and thus were less likely to be successful in the struggle for existence. Therefore, Corson wrote, Black people must suffer physically, a result which forbids any undue increase in the race. The discovery of this theory, called the racial extinction thesis, it had a name. This theory, it was a theory. It was a basis for thought. The racial extinction thesis electrified Hoffman, and he spent the rest of his life promoting it while campaigning to stop any sort of movement toward a national health insurance program that might prevent or slow down the extinction of Black people in America. Race traits and tendencies of the American Negro. In August 1896, the American Economic Association published a book that represented a turning point in Frederick Hoffman's life and sealed the fate of single payer insurance in America. It was Hoffman's magnum opus, summarizing decades of compiled statistics on Black versus white mortality, proving, according to Hoffman, once and for all, that for Black people, gradual extinction is only a question of time. In Race Traits and Tendencies of the American Negro, Hoffman set out not only to repeatedly make and statistically prove the above claim, but also to prove that anytime white people tried to help Black people, particularly by offering them healthcare services, the result was disaster for both. Noting that the Negro has failed to gain a foothold in any of the northern states, Hoffman wrote, he is in the South as a permanent factor with the tendency to drift into the cities, there to concentrate in the most undesirable and unsanitary sections. And the evil effect will be more felt by the cities, which are thus augmented in population of an undesirable character. In great detail, Hoffman spent about 300 pages documenting with exhaustive tables and statistics the fact that Black people were more likely to die as a result of everything from malaria to tuberculosis to childbirth. And it was all because of their race, Hoffman noted. The decrease in the rate of increase of the colored population has been traced first to the excessive mortality, which in turn has been traced to an inferior vital capacity. This racial inferiority has in turn brought about a moral deterioration, sexual immorality, diminished social and economic efficiency. Told you this might be triggering to some. Sure as hell is triggering to me. I don't know about you, but this is very triggering. This is triggering. And that represented a danger to white people. Hoffman wrote, the participation of freed black people in the contemporary labor pool and in society overall, he wrote, in the course of years must prove not only a most destructive factor in the progress of the colored race, but also in the progress, social as well as economic, of the white race, brought under its influence. So basically, what he's saying is because we're so damn inferior, we're going to eventually become extinct, but we shouldn't be around white people because it might rub off on them. Slavery had actually been good for black people, Hoffman believed. Now, where have I heard that? Where have I heard that? Now this was back in before the 20th century. This was back. This was back then. Now, where in 2023 have I heard? Have you heard? Has anybody heard that slavery internet connection? Internet connection was low. Hmm. My internet connection may be slipping. Hold on. Unstable. Yeah, it's saying unstable. Not sure why. I hope you can still hear me. If you can still hear me, put a light up in the chat. If you're still able to hear me, put a light up in the chat. Okay, good. Good. Okay, good. Because it looks like my I will be, it'll probably be going in and out periodically, but okay, it looks like it's coming back up. I tell you, this is awfully triggering to me. Whew. Slavery had actually been good for black people, Hoffman believed, and the abolition of slavery at the end of the Civil War was only going to speed up the demise of the race. Quote, nothing is more clearly shown from this investigation, end quote. He wrote, quote, that the Southern black man at the time of emancipation was healthy in body and cheerful in mind. Mm. Where did he get that from? Healthy in body and cheerful in mind. The mortality rate of enslaved black people was dramatic. Anyway, he neither suffered inordinately from disease nor from impaired bodily vigor. But with abolition, formerly enslaved people were tending toward a condition in which matters will be worse than they are now, when diseases will be more destructive, vital resistance will be lower, when the number of births will fall below the deaths, and gradual extinction of the race will take place. Mind you, he's hoping that this happened. While Hoffman pioneered linking causal conditions such as asbestos and carcinogen exposure to sickness, he was so blinded by racism that a modern reader of his book constantly finds himself shouting, "But these things are often true of poor whites." These things are often true of poor whites. But see, listen, poor white people are invisible to they call them white people by their own description call them trash, white trash. White people are the poor white people are considered collateral damage in anything that they do with a specific purpose to um, harm black people, which is a bit ironic because these same poor white people are the ones who blame black people the most about their own plight. Hmm. He says these are caused by discrimination and poverty. At the time, though, the vast majority of white Americans agreed with him. I mean, well, they would. Superior, superior. Okay. He was echoing the white cultural and scientific consensus of the late 19th and early 20th centuries when he wrote, quote, given the same conditions of life for two races, the one of Aryan descent will prove the superior solely on account of his ancient inheritance of virtue and transmitted qualities which are determining factors in the struggle for race supremacy. The lower races, even under the same conditions of life, must necessarily fail because the vast number of incapables with a hard struggle for life has eliminated from the ranks of the white races, are still forming the large body of the lower races. Hmm. And according to Hoffman and the other white scientific racists, the problem wasn't just physical inferiority. Well, we've already discovered in the 20th century, well, probably well before that, but certainly in the 20th century and now in the 21st, that what's that physical inferiority was just a pipe dream. So many people come to mind with their physical prowess. You know them. I don't even have to name them, but you know who comes to mind. The goats in the physical realm. The deepest problem of the Negro, Hoffman wrote, was moral. All the facts that prove a low standard of sexual morality is the main and underlying cause of the low and antisocial condition of the race at the present time. The conclusion is warranted that it is merely a question of time when the actual downward course, that is, a decrease in the population, will take place. I mean, this man was salivating over that. I mean, dang it. This man was literally salivating over that, what he considered our untimely demise or timely demise as a race of people. In the meantime, however, the presence of the colored population is a serious hindrance. In the meantime, however, the presence of the colored population is a serious hindrance to the economic progress of the white race. For those well intentioned white people who want to help out the people who were a mere generation or two away from slavery, Hoffman and his colleagues included the Prudential Life Insurance Company had one simple bit of advice. Don't even try. They're saying for well-intentioned white people, all you white people, and that holds true today. I mean, you have a number of white people who want to help, who want to like Hartman, and you got people like Hoffman and his colleagues, including the Prudential Life Insurance Company at that time, they were saying, "Don't you even try it. Don't you do it. Don't you do it." From scientific racism to libertarianism. Now, this is kind of important because uh, I'm sure some of you have heard the term libertarian. They're supposed to not be um, Republicans, but trust and believe they are actually worse than Republicans. In 1980, David Koch of the Koch brothers famously ran for vice president of the United States under the banner of the Libertarian Party, an organization founded a few decades earlier by big business to give an economic rationale and political patina to their simple theory that economics were more important than democracy. You hearing what I'm saying? And that the quality of life of working people should be decided in the free marketplace instead of by unions or through democratic processes via government regulation. In this, Koch and his libertarian friends were echoing Frederick Hoffman. In his 1896 book, Race Traits, Hoffman laid out his scientific, quote unquote, scientific assertion that when government steps in to help people, it invariably ends up hurting them instead. Not only should there be no government assistance given to help African Americans, Black people, you light bulbs? Those of you who are in the class today, you getting what I'm saying? Not only should there be no government assistance given to help Black people recover from 3 centuries of property theft, forced labor, and legal violence, but it is scientifically wrong to even consider the idea. So you shouldn't even, I mean, it's scientifically wrong to even consider it, to think about it, to even consider the possibility of reparations or anything else to benefit specifically Black people. White people and government programs to better the lives of Black people, Hoffman wrote, deserve the most severe condemnation of modern attempts of superior races to lift inferior races to their own elevated position. The damage done to Black people by offering them any sort of help, government assistance, or even a minimum wage, he wrote, is criminal behavior for a civilized people. So, you want to know why there is no real minimum wage? Huh? Just like, I mean, these little pearls of wisdom, like the cancer that they knew of back in 1915, and now, minimum wage, minimum wage, criminal. Hoffman pointed to Native Americans to prove his point. Few races have made such a brave struggle for their own preservation. Few races can boast of so high a degree of aboriginal civilization. An iron will can be traced upon the countenance of nearly every Indian of note. Oh, these same people that they tried to exterminate, threw them all on little patches of land that don't offer anything. But it was government help, Hoffman wrote, that destroyed the American Indian. Government help. No, not the Trail of Tears, not the pillaging, and they're scalping for their hair. So that's where the scalping came from. Of course, they flipped it and made it sound like they were being scalped. No, they were scalping for their hair. White people were scalping the Indians for their hair, the Native Americans. It wasn't adulterated whiskey or the frightful consequences of sexual immorality spread around the forts and settlements of the whites that was sufficient to destroy the American Native Americans. It was charity. So he's saying no, it wasn't white people that did it. It was charity. The most subtle agency of all, he wrote, sounding like Ronald Reagan or David Koch, quote, governmental pauperism, the highest development of the theory of easy conditions of life, did what neither drink nor the poisons of venereal disease could do. And today, the large majority of the tribes are following the Maoris and Hawaiians toward the goal of final extinction. Mm-mm-mm. Trigger warning. Trigger warning. White Americans rationalized their brutality toward Native Americans and African Americans or Black people by saying that it was simple evolutionary biology. Only the strong survive. And when the weak are allowed to propagate, it weakens the overall human race. You've all heard of that. Survival of the fittest. That is the most ridiculous of statements to put on a human being. Easy conditions of life and a liberal charity are among the most destructive influences affecting the lower races. Did you hear this? God, it made I had to laugh to keep from crying here. Easy conditions of life and a liberal charity, like being good to people, being good to Black people and Native Americans in this context, are among the most destructive influences affecting the lower races, he says. Since by such methods the weak and incapable are permitted to increase and multiply, while the struggle of the more able is increased in severity by the increase in taxes and regulation. So now we know why they want lower taxes. You getting this? There's so many gems of additional information here. So many gems coming out of this. And it's not just charity. All of the facts prove, Hoffman wrote, that education, philanthropy, and religion have failed to develop among Black people a higher appreciation of the stern and uncompromising virtues of the Aryan race. I got to read this again. Education, philanthropy, and religion have failed to develop among Black people a higher appreciation of the stern and uncompromising virtues of the Aryan race, meaning all of the conditioning and indoctrination and freebies or whatever. Now, I'm not going to call it freebies, but philanthropy, the giving, the good treatment has not worked completely because you got some. Got some even today who have a higher appreciation of the stern and uncompromising virtues of the Aryan race. There's some. I don't even have to name them because I'm sure you know who they are. One is a justice on the Supreme Court. Instead of making the race more independent, modern educational and philanthropic efforts have succeeded in making it even more dependent on the white race at the present time than it was previous to emancipation. So he's saying when they were enslaved, they weren't as dependent on white people. I mean, do you hear this foolishness? Do you hear this foolishness? Modern education. So now we understand why they never wanted black people to have an adequate education. Pearls, there's another pearl. There's another gem. History is something, isn't it? Whew, the more you know. Free education, as any libertarian can tell you, is more dangerous to the souls of people than enslavement. And free health care is even worse. God forbid you educate them. Don't educate them negras. Don't you educate them negras. And what? You want to give them health care free? You want to give them free health care as well? Yeah, but poor whites suffer. Well, what the hell with poor white? Poor the hell with them. They're trash. They're expendable. I'm talking here about black people, and we are not going to spend any money. We do not want our taxes being used for free education and free health care. It's worse. Sounding like a modern day acolyte of Ayn Rand, Atlas Shrugged, Ayn Rand. Very, very popular right leaning writer, prolific writer, whose books are like a Bible to white supremacist racists today. Hoffman wrote, instead of clamoring for aid and assistance from the white race, the Negro himself should sternly refuse every offer of direct interference in his own evolution. The more difficult his upward struggle, the more enduring will be the qualities developed, meaning make it hard, keep it hard. Anybody wonder why we're still struggling as a collective? And like Ayn Rand, David Koch, and Ronald Reagan, Hoffman believed that these were eternal truths independent of race. No missionary or educator or philanthropist extended aid or comfort to the English peasant class during its darkest days, to the earliest settlers on the coast of New England, or the pioneer in the forests of the far west. It is extremely rare to find a case where easy conditions of life or liberal charity have assisted man in his upward struggle. Self reliance must be developed, and thus far have not been developed by the aid of charity and liberal philanthropy. This liberal ideal is still pervasive in our modern fragmented healthcare system. In our modern healthcare system. Hold on one second. Yeah. This libertarian ideal is still pervasive in our modern fragmented healthcare system. And in the midst of the COVID 19 crisis in 2020, it resulted in thousands of daily American deaths, disproportional, disproportionately hitting Black people. From scientific racism to no compulsory health care. The compulsory health insurance, what today we'd call Medicare for All movement of the early 20th century, was as much and possibly more about getting paid sick leave as it was about covering doctor's visits and hospitalization, because healthcare was so cheap that an unpaid week at work was a bigger hit to the wallet. But workers wanted both. The most successful effort of the era came out of an organization that a small group of progressive economists put together in 1905 and 1906, known as the American Association for Labor Legislation, the AALL. Their initial efforts were directed at paid sick leave, workers' compensation insurance, child labor laws, and workplace safety standards. To that end, they were actively using the kinds of statistical analysis that Fred Hoffman had both used and popularized to do everything from laying out his theories on race to showing an association between tobacco use and lung cancer. So Hoffman joined the AALL to promote their efforts. A charitable reading of his motivations was his statistical research on workplace phosphorus poisoning, and lung disease overlapped with their efforts, and they were an organization that, at that time, was held in high regard. He did, after all, consider himself, and was, in a very real way, a major force for reform in public health and workplace safety arenas. A less charitable motivation posited that Daniel T. Rogers' 1998 book, Atlantic Crossings Social Politics in a Progressive Age, Rogers wrote, on the AALL Social Insurance Committee, he became the Prudential Company's mole. Hoffman took credit for blocking the drafting of any resolutions of the AALL Social Insurance Conference in 1913. During the framing of the association's model health insurance bill, he dragged his feet, obstructed, pressed in vain for company initiatives in the medical insurance field, and informed his employers, more and more certain, that public health insurance was distinctly pernicious and a menace to our interests. Despite Prudential and Hoffman's efforts, government funded health insurance was gaining popularity in America and being considered or adopted in Europe. In 1912, Theodore Roosevelt made a third party bid for the presidency, forming the Progressive Party with its bull moose logo, and called for the protection of home life against the hazards of sickness, irregular employment, and old age through the adoption of a system of social insurance. Jane Addams, Hull House founder, dressed in suffragette white, seconded Roosevelt's nomination to wild cheers and applause. Roosevelt rallies routinely drew thousands of people, and the more than 200,000 people showed up in Los Angeles to support him and his party. Roosevelt's endorsement of social insurance, including health coverage, both reflected and reinforced a growing national sentiment. And in 1915, the AALL called for every state to support a program of health insurance. Prudential hadn't yet gotten into the business of insuring health. They would in 1925. But they could see the writing on the wall. What finally blew up Hoffman's support of the AALL apparently had to do with a system of insurance that had started in the late 17th century in the United Kingdom to cover fire losses that had gradually grown to include other forms of protection. It was called mutual insurance, and was unique from Prudential's model in that the companies were owned by their policyholders instead of traditional corporate stockholders. In this regard, mutual insurance companies ran much like employee owned co ops and lived in the nonprofit world both practically and philosophically. They also had lower operating costs as they didn't have to shovel wheelbarrows of cash to their stockbrokers and executives. America had a tradition of mutual insurance that started in 1752 with a company known as the Philadelphia Contributorship for the Insurance of Houses from Loss of Fire. Its founder was Benjamin Franklin, and it still exists. The idea of mutual property and casualty insurance companies grew from there across the states and around the world. In 1916, the AALL endorsed health insurance provided through a network of local and statewide mutual companies and called for those policies and also a small death benefit to cover funeral costs, which would have competed directly with the funeral coverage that was Prudential's main cash cow. Hoffman wrote to the company, "We, of course, cannot compete with compulsory insurance, including a death benefit, say $100." He resigned in disgust from the AALL and began a campaign sponsored by Prudential to stop nonprofit state funded health insurance. Hoffman and Prudential weren't alone in their concern. The Insurance Federation of New York told their members, This is only this is only the entering wedge. If once a foothold is obtained, it will mean attempts to have such state insurance of all kinds, including fire." The AALL produced model of legislation that was taken up in 1916 by 8 states, including California and New York, the former via a ballot initiative and the latter in the New York legislature. In addition to calling for policies that would pay all costs of health care, the AALL's legislation called for up to 26 weeks of paid sick leave. Dang, that's 6 months. Picking up steam, the American Medical Association endorsed the AALL's model legislation as well. The battle was joined. Prudential helps kill America's first healthcare for all campaign. Hoffman's Prudential sponsored campaign to prevent any state from adopting a statewide nonprofit profit health and death benefit insurance program went into overdrive through 1916-1920. He traveled to Germany several times to chronicle in minute detail the failings of the Kaiser system that had been operating since 1885. Prudential in 1905 had been swept up in New York's Armstrong investigation. And so, as historian Beatrix Hoffman, no relation to Frederick, wrote, because of their industry's public image problems, insurance executives knew their opposition to compulsory health insurance would be perceived as brazen self-interest. They needed a front man. And the guy who was famous for discovering the causes of numerous public health crises was perfect. Thus, Frederick Hoffman became the most well-known face of a massive multi-year effort to stop the AALL's campaign. He was remarkably effective. In the years between 1916, when he resigned from AALL, and 1920, when nonprofit state health insurance finally died, Hoffman wrote numerous pamphlets trashing the German single payer government health system, exposing corruption in the British efforts at National Health Service, and arguing that America's healthcare system would be thrown into chaos and crisis if the AALL's programs were adopted. His work was widely distributed, as historian Daniel Rogers noted. The Prudential saturated the state capitals with his pamphlets. His 1917 pamphlet, Facts and Fallacies of Compulsory Health Insurance, and the subsequent More Facts and Fallacies of Compulsory Health Insurance, published 2 years later, were the most widely cited and most consequential writings. Now, keep in mind now, let's not forget the impetus for this, for his efforts. Remember, all of these efforts were because he did not want black people to get insurance. He didn't want he didn't want black people to get anything. He wanted black people, he and others wanted the extinction of black people in America. Historian Beatrix Hoffman wrote that the facts pamphlet resembled race oh, here we go. Resembled race traits and tendencies in its impressive presentation of statistics and graphs alongside passionate polemics. Frederick Hoffman refuted every figure in the progressives used in defense of their plan, from misleading data on on German longevity to misleading estimate of costs and disregard of actuarial methods. Appealing to the Daniel Boone mythos of rugged independent individualism that didn't require assistance from government, Frederick Hoffman, which is a myth, rugged individualism is a myth. That's that concept of picking oneself up by one's bootstraps. There is no way. I'll talk about that in another video. Please remember to like this video, and please remember to subscribe, and please remember to give me some read hours. Read some watch hours. Watch the videos and learn. So, appealing to the Daniel Boone myth of rugged independent individualism that didn't require assistance from the government, Frederick Hoffman wrote in More Facts and Fallacies of Compulsory Health Insurance, quote, the ever-present menace to democracy and liberty is the perversion of the legislative function toward providing health insurance. Lawmakers and the public, Hoffman wrote as America was fighting Germany during World War I, were supporting state-funded health insurance, which is, quote, unnecessary and as essentially a product made in Germany as any legislative panacea brought forward for the alleged good of the people during a generation or more. The propaganda had its origin in the program laid down by the International Association for Labor Legislation, which held its first meeting in Basel, Switzerland. Hoffman went on to say, quote, the proposed legislation strikes one more blow at self-dependence and initiative and makes your citizen a subject rather than whether of king or commission matters. Whether of king or of commission matters little. Self-dependence and initiative, virtues only permitted to a few favored individuals in older forms of government, are again to be taken away from a large number of citizens in return for a mess of pottage, and the normal cycle of human stupidity becomes obvious. The Constitution promised liberty and happiness, not supervision and comfort. That is, the guarantees were moral, not material. This man was a trip, okay? Let's just understand that this man was a pure, unadulterated trip. A pure, unadulterated trip. Just a trip. Citing a 1917 report from the New Jersey Commission on Old Age Insurance and Pensions, Hoffman wrote, oh, he was a prolific writer, we'll give him that. Under any and every system of social insurance, the development of autocratic and arbitrary methods of interference with personal rights and liberties is a foregone conclusion. And quoting the Bureau of Labor Statistics, Hoffman wrote, quote, the state should concentrate its efforts on preventive work rather than on the attempt to cure diseases through insurance. In that the Workmen's Compensation Act had already taken some of the liberties away from the individual wage earner, and that health insurance would take more. That the tendency of health insurance would be to pauperize the workers. That health insurance was not suited to American needs. That health insurance abroad was economically unsuccessful. That its cost was prohibitive, and that it was an encouragement of malingering, and that self respecting labor did not desire it. Toward the end of the pamphlet, once again, warnings of the dangers of America adopting anything resembling Bismarck's single payer national health insurance system, Hoffman summarized, quote, the German experiment in paternalism and coercion sounds the most convincing note of warning to other industrialized countries where, under free institutions, under conditions of voluntary service, savings, and self sacrifice, indefinitely, I mean, infinitely better and more lasting results have been achieved. It is devoutly to be hoped that the warning will be heeded by the American people and that they will develop a strong and thoroughly effective opposition to any and every tendency towards autocracy, paternalism, and coercion under the plea of social insurance as inherently hostile and fatal to our traditional conceptions of personal and political liberty in a democracy. What a load of bull. Hoffman's writing and speeches shook America's political systems, particularly as this German born man of science warned of the dire consequences to American liberty and democracy represented by universal health insurance. In 1918, John R. Commons of the AALL, one of the AALL's co-founders, wrote that almost all of the nation's anti-compulsory health insurance propaganda originates from one source. All of the ammunition, all of the facts and statistics that may come across, no matter who gives them to you, will be found to go back to the Prudential Insurance Company of America and to Frederick L. Hoffman. Prudential paid to transport Hoffman all across America, from media events to congressional hearings to a trip to England to document the horrors of their national health system, which had gone into effect in 1911. He wrote from London in a widely read paper that because of the British National Insurance Act, the fine print of the English working classes, at one time the finest people of that type in the world, is gone, entirely gone, all because of universal health care. Historian Beatrix Hoffman wrote, his agitation was tireless, his influence widespread. His reputation as an expert allowed Hoffman to participate in the deliberations of the health insurance commissions of Illinois, Wisconsin, and Connecticut, and to successfully persuade commission members to vote against the plan. In 1920, in large part because of Prudential's efforts and Hoffman's warnings, California's voters resoundingly turned down a voter initiative in that state to provide health insurance, and although New York Senate passed the bill, it died in committee in the Assembly. While the AALL continued to campaign for state funded health insurance until their dissolution in 1946, They never again gained enough traction to get their proposal before any state legislatures or the U.S. Congress. Having succeeded in killing state funded health insurance, Hoffman, in the later 1920s, turned his attention back to the theory. Here we go. Told you this was ever most present in this man's mind. He turned his attention back to the theory that black people would eventually die out. Joy. Now this is in the 1920s, the Roaring Twenties, or what might be called part of the African American nadir of race relations, where a great deal of massacres and upheavals occurred um, toward black people. So he joined the Eugenics Research Association. I want you to hear this. He turned his attention back to his theory that black people would eventually die out, joining the Eugenics Research Association, whose work was later used by none other than Hitler to justify racial separation and his final solution. There's another gem. You've often heard that Hitler took his cues from America. Yes, it did. Yes, he did. He took his cues from the way that America treated black people. And these people in this Eugenics Research Association were working under the premise that America's black people were going to die out. Now, how do you suppose they were going to achieve that? That was by racism. And what do we say racism is? Again? Huh? The systematic subjugation within established institutions through structurally designed discrimination and denial of opportunity, equity, equality, and justice built into every institution in the country to control the formerly enslaved and their descendants in perpetuity, meaning forever after the enslavement ended. Do you understand racism now, people? That's racism. And this is what I'm reading about today. In 1929, Hoffman asserted in the African American publication Opportunity that the white race is almost solely responsible for the health progress which the South has made during the last generation, and that black people moving in large numbers into cities would lead to a thoroughly unwholesome state of affairs, which unquestionably would express itself in the course of time in a lower birth rate and higher death rate. Hoffman's influence lasted long past his death in 1946, which satisfied his stated desire to live long enough to see FDR out of office. As late as 1984, according to reporting in the Wall Street Journal, Prudential was still collecting premiums from African Americans, from black people, that were in some instances more than a third higher than those paid by whites. Now, that light bulbs was an earful. An earful, I'm sure. I am really triggered by this. The fact that we and maintain are maintained in this country as between 12 and 14% of the population. Reading this, I understand why we're kept at that. Why haven't our numbers grown? We are certainly having babies, even though some of us, some people don't choose to have children. Why are we still only at between 12 and 13% of the population in this country for many, many, many years? How do you suppose they maintain that level of growth or non growth? Well, you found out here, and that is scientific racism. Now, uh, that this is over, this discussion is over now, and I want to look at the groups, the people who are in the chat, and welcome you all to the chat. Ruthless, hello, my darling. Thank you for being here. Antoinette H. Oh, hi, how are you? Tiandra Sweet Tea. Oh, I pronounced it correctly. Oh, thank you for looking that up for me. Thank you for looking that up for me. Yes. Cause I was like, I I didn't know what that word meant. I am always in the constant um oh, I didn't mean to delete the message. Hold up. Oh, okay. I didn't I didn't mean to delete that message. This is because I'm using my screen, my touch screen. Okay. Too persuasive. Hello, my darling. Hello. Hello. Yes. Oop. Where's my chat? Oh, I can't stand when I do. Okay, show chat. There we go. All righty. Thank you for coming. I did say before. Oh, and thank you to anybody that happens to be watching from Facebook. I really appreciate it. I have you watching from my personal page as well as my formal page. And I do wish that you will share it, like it, and remember to like this video as well. And I can be found on every last one of these social media platforms. So do check me out. You'll find me just look for Dr. C. Smith, um, Auntie Dr. Cynthia, any one of those C. Smiths, uh, EDD, and you'll find me. I don't know whether anybody would like to. What's going on with this? Okay. I'm not sure if anybody is interested in coming up to discuss this, but I'm going to copy this into the chat, and you can feel free to come up. In the next few minutes, I do have a couple more minutes. If you would like to come up and discuss this topic, feel free. Feel free to discuss the topic with me. It's interesting. This is why I gave you an overview of what those terms were, what they're supposed to be for, because you hear a lot of it, especially during elections, the election period. You'll hear people talking about universal health care and things of that nature. Bernie Sanders talks about it all the time, and Elizabeth Warren talks about it all the time. Or what's her name? AOC talks about it as well. You'll hear these terms from people who describe themselves as progressive in the definition of progressive as it is in the 21st century, not the way it was back in the early 20th century. But just it's I'm shocked, but not shocked. I wanted to point out to you the fact that racism or white supremacism and its support through racism is in everything. It's in everything, even in the 21st century. We are in the latter half of the 21st century. Almost in the latter half of the 21st century. Or certainly in not the 21st century, but what I meant to say was in this decade, the latter half of this decade is what I meant to say. Sorry about that. We're almost in the latter half of this decade. And it's so sad to know that we are still grappling with crap like this. So just so you know that this is the reason why we don't have universal health care. So forget all that BS and all that propaganda and all that crap that you hear on TV. It ain't got nothing to do with nothing else but the fact that there are still people out here that want to see us gone, kaput, extinct, and they are not trying to contribute to anything that would increase our longevity. And that is a sad commentary in this country. Sad. So if there's nobody who is interested in coming up and talking about it, that's quite all right. But do comment, do engage, comment. Replay gang, comment. Make some noise. Watch the videos. That's what I'm trying to get now. I'm trying to gain watch hours. And I have over 100 and some odd videos now that you can look at, agree with or disagree with. Comment in the comment section. Tell me what you think. Give me your ideas, but watch. Engage. Turn on the light. Turn on the light. With that, I'm going to say thank you for joining me, and thank all of you who will be listening to this as already created on replay. I'm almost up to 1,000 subscribers, y'all. Thank you. Bye-bye now.